So I'm going to do a little bit about valuation and market analysis. So when underwriting a loan application, a mortgage loan company is usually interested in which of these values. So when we're underwriting a loan application, a mortgage company is usually interested in which of these values. And so the value that they would be interested in, right? What do we say? We got market price, market value. So income capitalization rate. So it's going to be market value. The difference between market price and market value is the market value is what the property value comes in at versus market price is what somebody is willing to pay for it. So they want to know that just because you're willing to pay $300,000 doesn't mean that the property is truly worth $300,000. They want to make sure that it's a safe investment for them. So the income approach would be used for appraisals of, is it an insurance company trying to determine how much to insure a property for? And no, that wouldn't be that one, right? Because the insurance company trying to determine how much to insure a property for, they would use the cost approach for that. So that wouldn't be the right answer there. A tract home in a new subdivision. Well, the tract home in a new subdivision really isn't going to be, its value isn't going to be so based on income. Its value is going to be based on the value of the property itself. So remember, the income approach uses income to determine value. And so that wouldn't apply there. Commercial and investment properties rented to tenants. Yeah, absolutely. The income approach would be used for those commercial and investment properties rented out to tenants because that's where the value is for that buyer. The person isn't buying the property because they want the school district or they want to be close to work. They're buying this property solely for the purpose of making money. So where we have a lot of data from a rented out property, if we have a apartment building, for example, and we have a lot of tenants in there, that is going to give us enough data to use that income approach to determine the value. And remember, for the income approach, we would use the formula of net operating income, which is how much we put in our pocket, right, after all is said and done, divided by cap rate. Our capitalization rate is how much profit percentage we want to make off of our investment, gives us the value. So if we're doing an income building, we can't pay more for the building than that formula would allow, or else our return on our investment won't match up. Okay. So that's what the cap rate is all about. The cap rate is what percentage of return I want to make. So if I want to make a 5% cap rate, I can pay more for the property than the guy who wants to make a 7% cap rate, because the value will change to that buyer because the income isn't going to change very much. We have whatever income it is probably going to stay close to that for a while. But when we change the amount of profit we need to see, then how much we can pay changes and fluctuates, if that makes sense. A church, we would use the cost approach to value a church, right? A cost approach on a church building. Why? Because a church building is unique. It's a special use property. We can't compare it to other churches that have sold in the area because there probably aren't very many. And even if they were comparable churches that have sold in the area, they might have a different clientele, a different group, versus when we have the income approach we would use based on an income property, which a church is usually not considered to be an income property. We're buying it for a special use. Special use properties usually go with that cost approach. A property maintains a higher value when it is located where, according to the principle of conformity. So is it next to a police station, in the middle of a neighborhood of similar properties, near a library, or next to shopping? And the answer to this one would be middle of a neighborhood with similar properties, because guess what? It conforms. We have things that are similar. Things tend to hold their value better. If you I'm thinking of a house in my neighborhood that's really over the top. The people I don't know what was going on there, but they just overdid it. They remodeled the place and they made it so fancy compared to the rest of the neighborhood. Now, it doesn't conform to the neighborhood very well, and it's not going to hold its value as well because it kind of sticks out. But if it was in a neighborhood of other similar over the top homes like that, instead of basic 1970s homes like most of ours around here, then it would hold its value better. So when we're close to other similar properties, we hold our value better. That's why you usually see subdivisions being built where every house is kind of roughly the same size. There might be different floor plans or different outside exterior finishes and things like that. But you don't usually see a McMansion in the middle of 900 square foot homes. It's just not how we do things because we want it to hold its value. Going along with that is we have the principle of regression and the principle of progression, right? If you think about when I'm talking about that over the top house in my neighborhood, it's going to bring the value down compared to if that house was in a similar property neighborhood because it's so over the top. It's the nicest house in the neighborhood. The principle of regression, I'm regretting my decision, right? Because the neighborhood houses are not as nice as that one, it's going to bring the value of that one down because the principle of regression. But then I'm thinking of another house in my neighborhood where the guy never takes care of anything. His yard's always a wreck. He's just a mess. But I live in a pretty stable, normal type neighborhood that people desire. So his value is being helped up. The principle of progression, his value is being helped up because all the neighbors take care of their stuff. But if he was in a neighborhood of other houses that they never mowed the yard and they never fixed the roof and everything just kind of ran down like his house is, then it would probably be worth quite a bit less. So that's one way to look at that. So Samantha is meeting with a client this evening to interview as a potential listing agent for the property. She shows them a report she has prepared that contains recent sales, listings, and expired properties from her local MLS that are in the neighborhood. What is Samantha showing her potential clients? And this one's pretty straightforward. This is the CMA, right? Now, one thing to remember about a CMA, a comparative market analysis or a competitive market analysis, depending on who you ask, that CMA is going to contain data that talks about what recent sales and active listings are in the neighborhood to help that client decide what their pricing should be. However, we are not allowed to call this an appraisal. We're not licensed appraisers. So we have to be careful when we do a CMA that we are disclosing the fact that we are not appraisers and that we're not going to be putting ourselves out as if this is an appraisal, right? A bank wouldn't use a CMA to make a loan, that kind of thing. So if we want to do an appraisal and call it an appraisal, we have to have an appraisal license. When using the cost approach, which of these is true? And it's the value, is it the value of the land? It's considered in the valuation. The cost approach is only used to value homes and subdivisions. The income earned by the property is most important in this approach, or comparable sales within the neighborhood are considered. So we would use this formula: replacement cost. So how much is it going to cost to replace this building in labor and materials, minus depreciation, which is the difference between what somebody would pay for the old building versus the new, plus land values. We got to add back in the value of the land because even if my house gets burned down, the land's still standing and still there for me. Got to give it credit, equals our value. So our cost approach formula is we take the replacement cost, which is the cost of labor and materials to replace this property, minus depreciation, which is the difference between what somebody would pay for the existing property that's older versus the new, plus land value, which is the value of the land by itself, equals the value on the cost approach. That is how we would calculate it. So it's probably a good idea to memorize that little formula to make things work for the cost approach. So next we have the subject property has 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and is in good condition. A recent sales comp had 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms. It was also in good condition, and it sold for $212,000. In the area, a bedroom is worth $25,000. A half bathroom is worth $12,000. What is the indicated value of the subject based on this comp? So we know that the comp is $212,000, and it's a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath in good condition. Our subject is exactly the same, also a 3-bedroom, 2-bath in good condition, with one exception. The difference is that the 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath house has an extra half bathroom compared to the subject. So because that comp is superior compared to the subject, we're going to have to make an adjustment here. And we're going to have to adjust this property, this comp, down, right? Remember Robin Hood, we rob from the rich and we give to the poor. when we're dealing with these comparable properties, we're going to take money away from that superior comp. We're going to make a negative adjustment. And since we know that the half bath is worth $12,000, we're going to make a negative adjustment of $12,000 because that comp is superior to the subject by that half bath. So if we do that, we take the 212 minus 12,000, we know that the value of the subject is 200,000 now. And that's how an appraiser would do things. He would make adjustments. So when we're talking about the sales comparison approach, the memory trick that I always use is that it is the, with the sales comparison approach, the memory trick is Robin Hood. Remember the story of Robin Hood. Robin Hood robs from the rich and he gives to the poor. So if the comp is superior, I'm going to make a negative adjustment. If the comp is inferior, I'm going to give to it. I'm going to rob from the rich, rob from the superior one. I'm going to give a positive adjustment to an inferior comp because I've got to give to it. It's poor compared to the subject. Remember, we never adjust our subject property. We only adjust the comps. Okay. That's the sales comparison approach. And sometimes people call it the market data approach, but they're the same thing. It's the same thing. It's just who is asking or who's talking about it. They're synonyms for each other. So an appraisal is the most likely price a property would sell for, the price a property sold for when initially purchased, regardless of how long has passed, determined using the gross rent multiplier or the gross income method. And remember, an appraisal is just an educated guess. It's the most likely price a property would sell for based on that person's the appraiser's knowledge of the area, knowledge of the comps, knowledge of what things bring in the area, different pricing points, all these things. The appraiser looks at data from the area, but also a lot of what makes an appraiser a good appraiser is he has a feeling for the area. He knows, hey, this neighborhood has a different value than that neighborhood because it's in a different school district, for example, or because the home is closer to a major business that employs a bunch of people. Some of the appraisal determinations have a lot to do with, in my opinion, the knowledge of the appraiser for the area. So normally when an appraiser is hired to go out and do an appraisal, they typically find somebody who's familiar with that particular market area. They don't usually go across the state to find somebody else. Now, that doesn't mean that they couldn't go in, look at the recent comparables, make comparisons, and come up with a good number. They could probably, but sometimes it's better when a person has a gut feeling for the area. The city of Detroit is selling a fire station it no longer needs. They have asked an appraiser to value the property for them. Which approach will the appraiser likely use? Now, remember, a fire station is a special use building. It's definitely a special use building. So they wouldn't use the sales comparison approach because how many other fire stations are we going to find as comp? Probably not many. They're not going to use the income approach because the fire station's purpose in life is not to produce rental income. They're going to use the cost approach because that is a property that sorry, my mind is went. They're going to use the cost approach because that is a property that is very unique and we don't have comparables for it. So we definitely wouldn't use it there. All right. When using the income capitalization formula, which income is used? This is a good question. The effective gross income, the annual net operating income, the monthly net income, or the gross income. So which one will be used for the income cap formula? Remember, your income cap formula is your net operating income divided by the cap rate equals the value. So the number they're going to use is the annual net operating income. But what are some other names and vocabulary that go along with the income capitalization formula that we need to know? So remember, when I look at a building and the building has a bunch of tenants, what is the most, if every unit was occupied and I didn't have any deadbeat tenants that weren't paying me, nobody I was trying to evict, if everything was going perfectly, what would that number be called? And that's my gross potential income or my potential gross income. If everything was right, if everybody was paying me, if there was no problems at all, your potential gross income would be whatever that building could bring. Now, taking away from that, my vacancy and collection losses. In other words, rent that I don't collect because the property is vacant or because I can't collect the rent because the person is in the middle of an eviction. I've got a tenant that's not paying me. I'm not collecting rent there. So when we take that into account, how much money, how much rental money, rental income am I actually collecting? The name for that is called effective gross income. Effective gross income. So it's effectively what I'm collecting, right? Effective gross income is the amount of money that I'm actually collecting in rent for my tenants. Now, we got to go a step further before we get to the bottom of this. So, how do we go from the effective gross income to the net operating income? And what we do there is we take away our expenses that we're spending to operate this building and keep it running. So, for example, my property taxes, my property insurance, to pay the guy to mow the grass, I have to pay for property manager. I have to pay to have the hallway repainted. Whatever the case may be, I'm spending money to maintain my building. If we take the amount of money that I'm spending to maintain the building and subtract it away from the effective gross income, what we're left with is the net operating income. So think of the net operating income as what you put in your pocket at the end of the day. What do you take home? What's your take home pay on this building? And that's my net operating income. What's left over after I take into account my vacancies and collection losses, so rent I'm not collecting, and any repairs that I need to do to the building or any maintenance or any upkeep. So then I get left with, once it's all said and done, my actual profit, which is my net operating income.